If there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that humans will believe almost anything. On Blasphemy with Chris and Marnee, we take a look at some of these beliefs, uncover their very human origins, how they've developed and changed over time, and the very real consequences they had in society and culture. Impacts that continue even today in our lives. Welcome to Blasphemy. I'm Chris Setti, and with me tonight, as always, is my wife, Marnee.
Hello.
And, how you doing?
I'm good.
Yeah, I know how you are because I've always said you. We're still in lockdown. The rest of May to go. Whatever. Whatever. But so when we talk about belief, a lot of time, my attitude towards it is kind of like, hey, belief is something that we do. It's something that is all of us partake in, but be careful what you believe, or, just hold on to it loosely and be ready to allow it to change and maybe even slip away to be replaced by something else, because otherwise you can get into some trouble, just individually, but also belief can be a very dangerous thing. And so I want to talk about a particular time period in our country and a predominant belief that emerged then. And it's wrapped around a character named Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Have you ever heard that name before?
I've heard you mention
You've heard me mention her, but I mean, most people probably are like, I
would never have heard of her until you... Yeah.
Right. But there are beliefs, there are cultural ideas, there are hate groups, there are all kinds of people who actually do believe some form of something that she came up with. And so I want to talk about her and kind of the world that was evolving and kind of developing around her, and how she stepped into a certain time period and put some stuff out there that was like, whatever, like, when we get there, it's gonna sound like silly science fiction. You're like, oh, what? But it led to literal Nazi Aryanistic ideas. When we talk about the Aryan race, when we talk about the Aryan brotherhood, when we talk about white supremacy and these ideas of an Aryan, they really come from her and the philosophy that she founded, which is called Theosophy, and it still continues today. There's chapters all over the world. There's still people that elevate her. She is a cult figure, essentially. They even call her HPB, which is like exactly what a cult does, right? Like Scientology with L. Ron Hubbard, they call him LRH, and they always give him these like cool little like nickname monikers because whatever. And so, they call her HPB, but it's kind of a fascinating story. She's kind of a bad bitch, to be honest. Like, apart from all the nonsense that she kind of put out there, and it's not her fault what would come after. She didn't say the things that later would be taken to. Okay. But she did set the foundation and she put some material out there that allowed people to rationalize some very evil things. And it's fascinating. So, you in?
Yeah,
you ready?
I want to hear about it.
Okay. So our story today begins on some accounts say July 31st, some say August 12th. I think there are a couple other in between there, but around then in 1831, a little girl is born in eastern Russia. I think it's the area that today we call Ukraine.
Oh,
Okay, so she's born into this wealthy aristocratic family. Her dad was a colonel in the Imperial Army. He was like he was in with the artillery, which were like horse-drawn giant guns. I can't even imagine what it was like to fight a war back then, but he was like, he was up there in the empire that was a high status, right? He was rich. And he was married to a daughter of a Russian princess, and so he married into wealth as well, okay? She was 17, her mother, when this baby girl was born, and they named her Helena, just like I said, right? Helena Petrovna, and that's who. So she's born in 1831 in Russia, and she grows up mostly in her grandparents' house, and so she's raised largely by a grandmother, and her grandmother teaches her this mix of like Russian folklore, old country magic, superstitious kind of stuff, and like sophisticated cultural, and she got the best education you could possibly get at that time. So it was like this mix of like old ideas and superstitions as well as new ideas and educating in the modern world. And we'll get to this time period, but it was a very interesting time period because it was as science was becoming there was kind of a revolution around the sciences going on, that would continue through the 19th century. There was a revolution around spiritual ideas. There was the Industrial Revolution, which was all of a sudden allowing us to do things that we never could do before. And we had to adjust our beliefs accordingly, right? And so she's born in 1831, and she grows up in this kind of lap of luxury. I mean, she would move all over the Russian, kind of imperial area. And when they moved, it was like all their staff, all their servants came with them. It was like she lived this life of being exposed to a lot of different places, learning from her grandmother and all this stuff. And so just prior to her 18th birthday, and so this would be in 1849, she gets married off to this middle-aged vice governor. And she becomes Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, which was his last name. And that's the name that she would go by for the rest of her life. Immediately after the ceremony, she tries to back out, right? Like literally, I do. They leave, however they did it then. They say they're to do their thing. They're married according to the law. And she was like, nope, I don't want this. And it's like, too bad. So he takes her back to his joint. And he's a rich dude or whatever. And
was she given to him by her parents, or is she?
I don't. It probably was a situation like that. Like, like finding a suitable person to take care of your daughter was part of the deal back then. And especially they're in a very high part of society, and so there was an expectation, obviously, societally also for them to do that kind of stuff. But she is not down at all because really her grandmother and mother were like, her grandmother was almost like what you'd call a feminist for the time. She definitely bucked societal expectations and did not teach Helena that she was limited by the things that only women could do and all that kind of stuff. And it really imbued Helena with kind of a bohemian attitude. Like she lived her own life and did her own things. Now we'll see that she, I think, made up also a lot of stories along the way and things like that. But she really is this interesting figure in a time period when not a lot of this was going on in the world of women. And she was a woman of incredible means. And so there's a whole discussion about privilege and stuff. Obviously, most women didn't even have the opportunity to because they were working menial jobs for nothing just to barely survive. So anyway, she's born into this world. She gets married to this guy, like I said, in 1849. She's just before she turns 18. And he takes her back home, and she is not into it. She's trying to escape constantly. Like she's always getting caught trying to run away. And so eventually he, a year later, he not calls because they didn't have phones, but I mean, he hit him up on the DM. No, he
slid into their DM.
He probably sent a rider on a horse for all I know. I don't know. He got a message to her family saying, come get your daughter.
Take this bitch. We're done.
She is way too feisty for me. And so, these arrangements are made. Okay. Now, when we get to this part of the story, things get weird. Okay. So these are facts that I've just told you.
Okay.
But I'm going to read you a quote from one of her biographers. His name's Peter Washington. He says, myth and reality begin to merge seamlessly in Blavatsky's biography at this point. So what happens now...
we just don't know.
Yeah, so the rest of her life is kind of her account, which changed over time, is different depending on when she told it. It picked up little elements along the way. And so, at this point, when I'm talking about her stuff, I'll try and remind you, like, this is what she said.
What she said.
Okay. And sometimes I'll say, like, here's why that's unlikely, but we'll just, for the most part, give her the benefit of the doubt or whatever. If it is all true, Jesus Christ, this woman lived an insane life, right? But anyway, so she is on her way back from her husband's house,
being
right?
returned home.
Exactly. So these guys are there to escort her, sent by her father, and she's going to go meet him in Odessa, where he's at currently.
Odessa, what?
Russia. And so they're over in Russia.
An Odessa, Washington.
Because there's an Odessa, Russia. Not because of the other way around.
I forgot where we were.
Right. We're in the new part.
Yes.
But anyway, so she's on her way she's being escorted by these guards back to Odessa to her father. And what she claims is that she gave him the slip, right? So she escapes them and she ends up bribing a ship captain to take her away. And so she gets on the ship and heads off, and she winds up in Constantinople, right? Istanbul today. Thank you. They might be giants. Taught us all that little history lesson.
I don't know if people know that song. You're going to have to.
Oh, my God. Everyone knows that song.
No.
If you don't, what is fucking wrong with you?
I want you to sing it to let them know.
How's it go? It goes, Istanbul is Constantinople. Istanbul is Constantinople. Istanbul is Constantinople. Why the Constantinople get the works? That's nobody's business but the Turks. I know the whole song. Like,
I know.
Even old New York was once New Amsterdam. Why did they change it? I can't say. I guess they liked it better that way.
The 80s. Yes.
Was that 80s or 90s?
No, that was 80s.
Are you sure?
So 80s, yeah.
I have to check that because I don't know if you're right there. But anyway, she ends up in Constantinople. And that's where we're going to leave Helen right now. Okay? So she's in Constantinople. But we have to get a feel for, like, the world at this time, because the belief that we're going to talk about that emerged out of this story and in this world, and that Helena Blavatsky played a big part in, is every belief springs out of that context, right? Beliefs you have to have people have a sense of familiarity. There has to be something there needs to be a need that's current, that they're feeling, that needs to be filled. Yeah. And so the context always kind of creates the boundaries for what will be believable. Yeah. And so the shit people make up kind of comes out of that context, right?
There's like that piece of truth.
Right. And I'm going to pay particular attention to America, because that's where she's going to end up eventually. And that's where a lot of shit's going to go down, and kind of the main thrust of her philosophy and stuff takes root there. Okay. And so in this time, America was divided. And we think, well, it's divided way more now. No, it was way more then, okay? I know we like to think that we are living in the worst time ever, and that, there's actually a cognitive bias called negativity bias, which our brain actually pays more attention to negative information than positive, because if you think about a survival strategy, it's perfect, because it's like, if shit's going good, I don't have to pay attention to it. It'll just keep going good, and it's fine, right? Yeah. It's the shit that is negative and scary and sparks those fight or flight instincts inside of me that I need to pay attention to. And so we tend to weight negative information as more valuable than positive information. So the 1840s and 50s. Now remember, the Civil War happens in the 1860s. Okay. So this is the period leading up to that. Okay. The 1840s and 50s was a very interesting time in America, and the nation was divided like bad.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Right. And they were divided amongst along all kinds of lines, right? Whether it be north versus south, that was definitely going on. There was social progressives and there were conservatives. There were people that were abolitionists and there were people that were pro-slavery. There were men versus women as women were starting to fight for their rights, and there was definitely divides there. Shit was real.
Yeah.
Like to the point that most people believed in the back of their mind that shit is falling apart and it might not make it.
Yeah,
like
we're not
probably won't.
Yeah, it's going to disintegrate.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk of like this experiment might be over. We're not going to be able to deal with this. And you see a lot of parallels to today in this, right? And so this idea that we're so divided and stuff. Now, again, obviously we only have the experience we're having.
Yeah.
We can only have the frame of reference of when we're existing. But we need to understand we have it so good. Even in the midst of fucking this.
Yeah.
We have it so goddamn good compared to what was going on back then.
Yeah.
And when they thought things were hanging by a thread, things really were hanging by a thread.
Yeah.
It wasn't hyperbole and people that just weren't getting their way or whatever. It was like, it was rough times. It was also the end of what's called the Second Great Awakening. And the Second Great Awakening was this time period in the late 18th, early 19th century when wave after wave of evangelical revivals kind of spread over the country. Like literally every city and county would have preachers come in with their tent and the whole town would come and they would, repent and save everyone. And that whole scene that we still see going on today to a certain extent, it's more of a novelty and like, let's a throwback, like, they're trying to be retro Christians. But back then, this was a thing because after the Revolutionary War, church attendance dropped. I mean, it wasn't like super religious country, right? And so there was an opportunity to like go out and like build converts and do all this shit. And so all these itinerant preachers went out and did this. But this created a really, really interesting problem because after doing that for a while, it was like you would roll into town preaching the same message, saying the same thing as the dude who was just there with the same kind of tent that just, like you had to start distinguishing yourself. And so deep sectarian and denominational divides began to form amongst, for the most part, a very common group of Christian believers. Because a preacher would have to come in and he couldn't just be like everybody else. He had to say, well, no, the real truth, and so you started having these groups that began to start going, oh no, this guy's got the real message. That other dude, he's not preaching the real stuff. Shit you hear today in every fucking church probably in town.
Yep.
And so there became this real disillusionment with religion, especially traditional ideas around religion and the establishment like Christianity. And so there really was, even though like 2/3 of the nation was Christian or church going or what have you, the opposition, the backlash, the people that weren't down with church and religion and all these kind of traditional ideas was pretty intense.
Yeah.
And they really, really kind of had an intense response to all this kind of nonsense because they're the people that were in the mix going like, okay, so you're telling me this, but it's the same goddamn thing. And you're telling me this and it's the same goddamn thing. And you're telling me, so they're like, I'm done with it.
Yeah.
Right. So this is all going on, like deep divides. You've got this kind of like thirst for something because they've rejected all the traditional shit that's been going on. And you add to that, like, the scientific and industrial revolution that continued to the 1800s was like a time of relentless progress. We think like, oh, the new iPhone is such a technological leap. No, these people were seeing their lives change on a regular basis in huge ways. It was like getting the iPhone for the first time over and over and over and over, right? It was like that kind of progress. Yeah, it doesn't look like our kind of progress because we're standing on the shoulders of the people that started that. But at the time, it was fucking changing their world. It was radically upending the way people had traditionally lived.
Yeah.
Long-held careers were being replaced by factories. You know, like all kinds of things were going on, right?
Yeah.
And this, as the sciences were kind of getting developed and stuff, like people would go out and dig up a fossil with no frame of reference, right? Because it's like some of the first fucking fossils that have ever been dug up.
Yeah.
Now, today we dig up a fossil and we have all 200 years of like fossil record to compare everything and see like, well, what is this, you know?
Right.
Back then, they didn't. And so they're just throwing out wild theories about what they were finding. And so what you knew about reality was changing constantly too, because this person would dig up this and this person would dig up this, and all of a sudden, oh, a new crazy theory has replaced the old crazy theory because we found something else and they're different. We don't know what the fuck to do with that. So it's in the early stages of all this shit. So it just creates this really difficult, scary, uncertain kind of time.
Yeah.
So within this, something begins to take root. And it really starts with two young girls, two sisters in New York. And it's in a place that no longer exists, but it's right outside of Newark, New Jersey in New York. So it's like just south of New York City. Mm-hmm. And in the winter of 1847, 1848, that winter, they began playing a prank. But that prank would literally lead to the eruption and the popularization of something that would become known as spiritualism.
Oh.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you what really happened, right? I'm not going to tell you what they believed was going on and all that kind of stuff, because we have a lot of time since then. There's been a lot of investigations, both contemporary investigations that were happening then. There were plenty of people going like, right? And since then, we have all kinds of investigations and books and all kinds of shit. So we know what happened, okay? From their own words, you know, even. So I'm going to tell you what really happened and not pretend that they were really doing something. But this is what starts this whole movement that would sweep across America, mostly the North, but in America, become the fastest growing religion of the last half of the 19th century, at least up until like the 1860s, 1870s. And it will be the world in which Helena Blavatsky will formulate her particular ideas that would then go on to be, you know, used for some dastardly shit. Bored because they were in the middle of New York winter and because they had the misfortune of living in 1848, Kate, age 10, and Maggie, age 14, decided to play a little game. So what they did was, when they would go to sleep, they had rigged these apples up with strings that allowed them to bounce them on the ground, and it would kind of make the sound kind of go throughout the house, in this old wooden house, right? And it freaked their mom out. And so they were totally like, this is awesome, right? So they kind of are like, these two little girls are playing this joke on their mom. Well, their mom is convinced, oh my God, something supernatural is happening. And so she starts having neighbors come over to witness this. And so the girls like take it to the next level, and they devise kind of this little Morse code kind of thing to where they can ask it yes or no questions, and it will be like 2 taps for yes and 1 tap for no or whatever. And they call them rappings is what they all called it in the papers and stuff. And so they're fucking answering questions from beyond, you know, to these spirits. And at first they said it was, they called him Old Splitfoot, which was a name for the devil, but they backed off of that because that was controversial, and it was like, oh, ooh, we went too far, you know. So they like pulled back, and they decided it's the spirit of a peddler who came to this house to sell something and was murdered by the person who lived here years ago, right? And it literally led to people believing this, and they went on and tried to fucking find out who this was, and they eventually went through records and found that some dude used to live there, and they like ruined his life, and this did not happen, right? So it's like, interesting. That motherfucker's like, fuck you, spiritualist. but so you know, people, they're getting famous. I mean, there's like newspaper articles all over New York State about these sisters who are speaking to spirits beyond, you know, kind of this realm, like. And so now they had an older sister named Leah. She's 34 at this time. Can you imagine having a 34-year-old and a 10-year-old? Oh my God, just fucking shoot me. But Leah, she totally knows what they're doing, right? They sleep in the same goddamn bedroom, you know, like she knows what's up. So she becomes their manager. And she takes them on the road, and they head up to Rochester because there were some people up there that had been reading about these sisters doing this crazy shit. And they're like, hey, bring them up here. We want to see a demonstration of these psychic abilities. Now, understand, at this fucking time, it was completely, remember, they're living in this age of scientific discovery. Around every corner is a new mind-blowing thing that they never imagined.
Yeah.
The idea of this kind of phenomenon, like telepathy, mind reading, talking to, spirits and shit like that, psychic powers, they didn't see it as like supernatural. They saw it as, this is just stuff we can do that we just don't understand how to measure or whatever yet. A lot of people believe that today.
Yeah.
That idea, in fact, doctors and totally believe this was in the realm of possibility for the human brain. And there was more than one doctor who kind of like spoke out against these ideas. Like, you guys, we're not going to help anyone by studying nonsense that we know that this isn't true. We don't have magical powers. We need to be focusing on how to save people that are dying of real things. Yeah. And they got like fucking shunned from medical communities and shit like that, right?
Yeah, people like the magic.
Yeah. And so she takes them up to Rochester, right? And they're like, oh shit. Now, the story I'm telling you again, this is coming from their later on confessions and their accounts of what's going on. So they're up at Rochester, and they want them to demonstrate these powers. Well, while they're there, they found out that they could make their toes pop, the joints in their toes pop, like by moving them a certain way, like reliably. And so in front of a paying crowd, the girls demonstrated this ability to communicate with the spirits through this rapping sound. So basically people would stand up and say like, I want to ask the spirit this. And then they would do it, right? And they would fucking...
They would, what? Is this the apples on strings or what?
No, because they don't have they're on the stage. They can't do the apples on strings. And so they're probably panicking like, oh, shit. But they find out, they're probably going, how can we make this sound? How can we do this? Yeah. And they find out that they can make their toes pop just like by moving them. And just the acoustics. I mean, all the buildings were built with acoustics to carry sound because there was no electronic PAs and shit back then to like in mics and speakers, and so they could like. That
seems weird and unbelievable. That
this is
make
absolutely
toes pop at will.
This absolutely happened. I've known plenty of people who can do that. Absolutely, I know people who could pop every knuckle on their hand
again and again. Like
yeah,
after you've just done it, you can
absolutely.
Do it again.
Yeah, totally.
All right.
Now, no, I mean, people can do some weird shit. Okay, and so they go up there and demonstrate this to this crowd, and the people fucking dig it. And it actually is the first time that like spiritualist phenomenon like this was demonstrated in front of a paying crowd. But this would become a thing that, I mean, probably thousands of these events would happen after this with a variety of different people doing a variety of different things due to a variety of different reasons that they're coming up with. Okay. But they're the first. These 10 and 14-year-old girls who are just fucking around, who I love them, but they're in over their head at this point, right? So by 1850, they're famous mediums. They're like renowned. Yeah. And they gain the backing of a wealthy benefactor. And so they wind up doing seances for paying customers. I mean, they're like celebrities. Yeah. And like any good child stars worth their salt, they also begin drinking heavily. Now, again, at this point, they're like 14 and 17 years old, right? Yeah. And so they start what would become lifelong alcoholism at this point. Yeah. And so, again, they're under pressure. Yeah. They're performing. Yeah. Like you said, like, what if it doesn't work this time? What if my toe doesn't crack right? You know, all this shit's going on. And they came up with other ways to, like, display this and trick people. But this dude, the wealthy guy, totally believed that they were communicating beyond. And they're, doing their thing. They're basically become famous in this movement that they sparked popularly, right? And so Leah, who was their manager, now kind of not needed, but still making, she still became big in the spiritualist movement because she was tied to her sisters. And she still made money in different ways off of their stuff and all this kind of shit. But she marries a Wall Street banker. She marries a rich dude. And, you know, like every manager of a child star, she's fine.
Yeah.
They're fucked. She's fine. In 1851, a relative of the Foxes admitted that she had helped the girls conduct their hoaxes during the seances and performances. So what she says is that when they would have these seances, she would like touch the girls to let them know when to do their thing, basically. So she was kind of there because these are little girls, you know, being pressured to answer these things. And so they had this adult, and so she kind of helped. And so I don't know if the whole family became involved in this, but there were certainly associates that understood that this was a performance. This was something that was a trick, and they helped in it. Maggie meets an Arctic explorer in 1852 when she's 15. He was this famous guy. This is a time when exploration, world travel, this is the days of like around the world in 80 days, you know, all that kind of shit, right? Like this was when we were busting into new white people were finding new places and celebrating it. And the people who did that and kind of battled the odds and went to these like places that no man could ever go before were celebrated. So she meets this famous guy who was an Arctic explorer, and he totally knew. He was convinced that these girls were committing a hoax. They're they're fraudsters. But he blamed Leah. Right? He's
the
like,
older sister.
He's fucking, she's the one that's like using them and making them do this. And I don't know if that's true, but that's what he thought. And so he tries to take her away and eventually successfully marries her and, you know, moves away with her to kind of separate her from that influence. She even converts to being a Catholic and kind of moves away from the spiritualist movement and all that kind of shit. But he dies in 1857. Shit. And Maggie immediately goes back to holding seances for money because that's what she knows, right? It's not like she believed that was real. She knew it wasn't. And she will later fully admit that for the entire world. But it's what she knew. It's what she knew how to do. It's like if you put any woman in this world, especially in this situation, that's what you fucking do, right? So Kate had moved to England. She was brought over by some rich people to basically demonstrate her spiritual powers. And while she was there, she met a lawyer and married him and had 2 kids. Eventually, Maggie winds up in England with Kate in 1876. Okay. And when Kate's husband dies, she's left with these 2 kids. And so they both moved back to New York City. They moved back home. So then things get super real in 1888, okay? So they're in New York. They're kind of, you know, trying to do the seance thing, trying to do stuff, keeping odd jobs, still really gnarly alcoholics. And so in 1888, Leah, who's fine still because she married a rich guy and she wasn't, you know, she was the manager.
She's like way older now because
she's older at this point. She would have been, she's like 71. At this point. But Leah's like gets concerned, like I'm concerned for my sister's kids, and so she starts kind of petitioning and kind of moving and even getting the spiritualist kind of community to be like, those kids shouldn't be with Kate because her alcoholism was getting really bad. Maggie, meanwhile, they're living essentially near each other, at least in the same vicinity. She starts thinking about becoming a Catholic again and starts basically thinking that her powers come from the devil, and so she's not doing great mentally either. Again, she's been drinking literally since she was a little kid.
Mush.
On October 21st, 1888, Kate and Maggie agreed to show the world how they made the rapping sounds.
Interesting.
Before 2,000 people, Maggie showed how they did it. Doctors from the crowd came up and examined her and confirmed that this was the source of the sounds, the toes. Like she's like, here, watch, and I'll show you how I do it. And there was doctors that were in the crowd, and they're like, I want to examine, and so all these doctors that were just happened to be there
Yeah.
because they were like skeptical, like, what the fuck, and they show up and they confirm, like, yep, that's what's going on. So the girls claimed that they did this because they wanted to hurt Leah. Because Leah was trying to get Kate's kids taken away.
Huh.
And so they're like, because she was still big in the spiritualist community. She still
Yeah.
had her reputation. She, and so they're just lashing out at their sister, who had technically probably abused them to a certain extent, right? And now
taken advantage, exploited.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to defame the name of fucking Leah Fox. I don't know this, but it seems like
possible.
okay, we're not different than them, and that's what goes on now.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
exactly.
Is like I have experience in this world that I'm sorry, these people are acting just like anyone that you've seen around. A signed confession by Maggie was printed in multiple New York newspapers by the next day. Okay, and they included this quote. This is Maggie talking. Quote, that I have been chiefly instrumental in perpetuating the fraud of spiritualism upon a too confiding public, most of you doubtless know. The greatest sorrow in my life has been that this is true, and though it has come late in my day, I am now prepared to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. I'm here tonight as one of the founders of spiritualism to denounce it as an absolute falsehood from beginning to end, as the flimsiest of superstitions, the most wicked blasphemy known to the world. Holy shit. Now, a year later in 1889, she's really hit the skids. I mean, they are both basically in abject poverty. Mm-hmm. So she tries to recant that statement so she can go back to doing seances thinking, it's like an old child star who's like, I'll make a comeback and I'm so famous, people will remember me, But of course, nobody showed up. Within 4 years, all three of the sisters would be dead. Both Maggie and Kate died in complete poverty, hopeless alcoholics living in tenement buildings, relying on charity, shunned by spiritualists and society. Mm-hmm. They were both buried in what were called paupers' graves. They were just graves for the poor.
Yeah.
Potter's fields, we call them now, or whatever. And then, but so that's the story of how spiritualism got going. Okay, and as you can see, it's not real. Yeah. Obviously, it's a sad story of human tragedy.
Yeah.
And it's also a story of human gullibility. And but again, at this time, people are yearning. Yeah. And they're ready for something new because they're seeing new things all the goddamn time. Yeah. And so
they opened up from rejecting the common beliefs, and so it left a vacuum.
Exactly.
To take in any new thing available because they need to have belief.
Right. But what is spiritualism? Because this is how spiritualism wasn't they didn't invent spiritualism. Mm-hmm. Spiritualism was coined by a guy we'll talk about in a little bit, but I mean, it was a few years earlier that kind of term entered a very narrow part of our culture, but our culture. Yeah. They were the ones that got it going, right? They were the ones that represented the celebrities that sparked this movement that would then branch out into all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. So again, remember, this was a time when new sciences, new technology, and deeply ingrained superstitions kind of came together into this interesting mix. Mm-hmm. Because while they were rejecting traditional religion and Christianity, this certain segment of society, they also didn't know a lot. It wasn't like they had our level of understanding. And look at us, right?
Look at us.
So they had a whole world to make shit up in, right? They had just a lot of a vacuum, right, basically. And so it made a perfect environment for something like spiritualism to emerge. And as others got in the game and began formulating their own spiritualist philosophies and abilities, people didn't embrace it, like I said, as magic or paranormal. This was rational. They rationalized it. They're like, this is some natural force that we're just interacting with and we don't know how. Yeah. We don't know how we're doing it. And some people can and some people can't, and so they're kind of this wasn't some magic from beyond or it's God talking to us. Yeah. They were thinking this was some scientific thing that we just haven't quite defined yet. And also remember that this was a time when like there were deep cultural divides. Like I said earlier, things were falling apart in a very real way.
Yeah.
They weren't trying to make a point when they were saying that. They're like, shit, this
Yeah.
could all dissolve. Things were that bad.
Yeah.
No matter who you talk to, they had intense feelings about us versus them in some way.
Like they were marching towards the Civil War.
Right. And so the combination of these environmental factors played significantly into the philosophy that would build around spiritualism. Ideas that would become the fastest growing religious movement during the second half of the 19th century. The term spiritualism itself was coined a few years before the Fox sisters started doing their thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this guy named Andrew Jackson Davis, he's going for a walk and he comes across what was known as a mesmerist back then. And mesmerism was an idea that, kind of a pseudo-scientific idea that came from a guy. His last name was Mesmer.
Yeah, I know this because when I
Yeah, I know you know
hypnotherapy-
this. I'm not talking to you. And so,
No, I am just saying like that is the origins of hypnosis. Is mesmer.
It's used interchangeably now, and it did represent, because it was a trance
Mm-hmm.
based kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But mesmerism itself is the idea that there is a force connecting, emanating and connecting everything living and inanimate.
Mm-hmm.
He called it animal magnetism. Have you ever heard that term?
Mm-hmm.
He coined that term.
Okay.
And so mesmerism and magnetism, they believe, they would put you in this trance and what have you. And then, so he has this happen. He meets this guy and he does his mesmerism thing on him. And he walks away and his mind's blown. He's like, I saw the world in a totally different way.
Mm-hmm.
And so he takes that idea of this force connecting everything and he retermed it as sympathy. Now, it's a different definition than how we use it now. Sympathy was the force. It was the thing that connected all of us, that bound all of us, that kind of flowed between all of us. And it even extended beyond the grave, which is why people were talking to dead people.
Okay.
Was because they're connected to them through this force. And mesmerism believed that you can manipulate and channel and control this force to cause healing, to bring about positive effects, right? And so Andrew Jackson Davis takes this and he's like, right on. And so he coins the term spiritualism around this loose philosophy that he borrows from mesmerism, reterms that animal magnetism as sympathy, and he starts promoting it as, hey, maybe it's not something that can just heal an individual. What if we all got on board with this? We could heal our country. We could heal society. Like all of these things that we're seeing, all this division, all of this political divide and racial divides and divides amongst the sexes, we could heal all of this if we could all get together and start controlling this sympathetic energy that is all around us. Okay? That's what's interesting about spiritualism is, while it certainly was played upon by a bunch of hucksters who were charging money for doing things that they were totally faking, proven over and over by even people at their own time debunking them. The core philosophy, the thing that people were buying into, by and large, was this idea of we can make society better for everyone through this. There was this real sense of, now cults do that a lot. Again, drawing parallels to Scientology, they teach you the same thing. We're literally saving the planet. And that's kind of how he saw it, was like, hey, this could be the thing that keeps this thing from crumbling like we feel it's going to. And so he's really the guy that starts the spiritualist movement in the sense of defining the earliest philosophies around it. And then the Fox sisters happen. They weren't trying to be spiritualists. They had probably never fucking heard of that before. They were messing around because, again, they're bored little teenage girls. But their actions and what they got swept up into would launch that spiritualist. So it'd become not just some crazy dude walking around telling you about this force. It became known around especially the Northeast, as it went newspapers and people were talking about it, and there was shows where you could go and see these people do these amazing stuff. So, unfortunately, their utopian dream came crashing down as the Civil War broke out, leaving in its wake even deeper racial divides. Like, this is when hardcore white supremacy was established. Yeah, there were, I mean, this doesn't mean that it was good racism before, but after the Civil War, the resentment from the South, it got really, really, and so, the resurgence of the KKK, and things really got rolling. And so things were worse, right? So the spiritualist movement was this idea that, the first half of it anyway, was this idea that we can heal these divides.
Interesting pause. We just had a black president.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, things got worse. Like when something that you thought would, like, okay, we decided the issue. We're done with this. This idea won out. We finally got a black president, and then like the resentment and anger from it. It's like things are. Is it worse, or is it just that it's more like aggressive, like out there, like going at you? Yeah. Whereas it was always there before, just like in the Civil War. Like it was there. It wasn't not there, but it was probably.
Yeah, it's hard. It's like, how do you stop that pendulum from swinging back and forth? It's a tough. It's an interesting social and philosophical debate, but back to our story. But see, what happens is after the Civil War, people don't really abandon spiritualism. They just adapt. And what happens is all that philosophy around the meaning behind spiritualism, that it's going to heal these ills and people and divides and of society and all this kind of shit, they drop that, but they keep the fascination with the stuff they're doing, right? The powers they're demonstrating. And so they still remain fascinated and really into all the spiritual phenomena that these people were supposedly manifesting. They just didn't believe it meant anything anymore. They literally were just like, obviously it doesn't. Look what fucking happened.
Yeah, we just broke out into...
Right.
Yeah.
And things are worse than it was. So, but it's still pretty cool how that person could talk to, Uncle Joe or whatever. And so it kind of goes through that arc, spiritualism. And now we're going to get back to Helena, because she's going to emerge on the scene so that leaves this huge vacuum. People need meaning. I mean, we do. We're always on a search for it. We're trying to figure out the meaning of every goddamn thing.
Yeah. So
have you ever seen someone get a text from someone that's a little bit cryptic? Watch them. Like, we need to know what things mean.
Yeah. So you had Christianity, and then people losing confidence in that, and so that leaving a vacuum for spiritualism, and then the thinking that the spiritualism was going to bring peace, and then we had Civil War, and so then there's another vacuum, and so Helena is introduced in this vacuum.
Yeah. With that in mind, let's get back to Helena, actually, who's about to embark on an incredible journey, at least if we can trust her account, which I don't believe we can. And most people that aren't theosophists, this is the hard thing about Helena Blavatsky, right? It's like, when you go out and I'm going to watch this YouTube video and it says The Life of Helena Blavatsky. It's put out by people who literally believe she was an ascended conscious. I mean, so the whole thing is just mythologized and they just buy into all of her stuff. So it's kind of hard. But many, many biographies have been written by people who were not, they didn't have any skin in the game. You know, they're just there to find out. Yeah. And, by and large, a lot of this has been debunked. But it still makes for a great tale, and this is what she told. This is her life story according to her and according to her believers. When we last left her, she was in Constantinople.
Being escorted back to her father.
No. She escaped, remember?
Oh, she escaped.
And she bribes the captain, and she's in Constantinople. Right. So over the next 9 years, she claims that she traveled all over Europe, India, and the Americas, learning from all of the cultures and religions she experienced along the way. While on this journey in 1851, she meets a mysterious Indian man she calls Master Moria. Now, the masters are like these figures that are like ascended consciousnesses that can manifest in the world, and they have like the secrets of the universe, right? She called them the masters. Later, they called them Mahatmas as she kind of Hinduized her religion in India. But she called them masters. And so she says, along the way, in 1851, she meets this guy named Master Morya. He plays big in her whole tale, usually. She's, of course, identified as an exceptional person, very special. They always are, right?
The masters identified her.
Oh, yeah. They saw right away that she was special.
Here we go.
She saw things differently than everyone, right?
I see. Mm-hmm.
And so he proceeds to tell her that there's a special message. There's a mission that you have towards mankind. And you need to get to Tibet so that you can train in all of our knowledge of the masters so that you can do this, right? Mm-hmm. So she goes, for some reason, on some world traveling. I never saw an explanation of why she doesn't just head straight to Tibet, but she doesn't. She kind of travels around, but she eventually gets to Tibet. Now, understand, again, this is fucking 1851. She wasn't getting in a car or a truck or a goddamn, probably not a train for most of this. Because, that was just happening. Mm-hmm. There were no planes. She was walking or fucking,
riding a horse.
Horse or a boat.
A stagecoach.
Right. She ends up at Tibet eventually, and they won't let her in. Right, the British government refuses to let her in. And so by 1867, she winds up in Italy where she gets a message from Master Morya. I don't know how he knew she was going to be there.
Where'd you go?
I don't know where it came from. I don't know if a bird flies in and just alights on her finger and it has a message in its beak. But he gets a message to her and he says, hey, meet me in Constantinople. And so she does. And the two of them set off on this journey to Tibet. And so they go through Turkey and they go through Persia. They go through Afghanistan, India, and they finally get to Tibet. So she gets in this time because I guess the masters got cred or whatever, or they smuggled her in. And so she claims for the next 2 years, she's trained in the ways of the masters, the knowledge of the masters. They help her develop her psychic powers. She teaches herself a secret ancient language that allows her to translate these mysterious texts that give her even more of the truth, the real truth of the universe, right? And if you know anything about the beginning of Mormonism and some other kind of cultic kind of forms of religion, same thing, right? It's kind of I found these special things that only I can read. So she did that whole thing. And so she's doing this while she's in Tibet, supposedly. Okay, now here's a few problems. First of all, Europeans were not allowed in Tibet at this time, this whole time she's talking about, which is why she got turned away if she did, in fact, get to Tibet that first time. Now, I will give it to her that maybe she got smuggled in, or maybe because she was with this master, which obviously, he can get you in. He's a fucking ascendant being, he can do whatever. So we'll just give her that thing. Here's the problem. If you Google Helena Blavatsky and see a picture of, I don't think she was ever an athletic, fit, physically capable woman. Okay. Again, we're talking about traveling through Turkey, Persia, Afghanistan, India. This is not a little music playing, a hop, skip, and a jump, and we're there. This is grueling for even the most seasoned traveler and survivalist, right? There are so many ways to die out there. Now you could say, her followers, well, the master was with her. So it's hard to get around all that kind of magical thinking. But the idea that she actually did this is unbelievable to me. But whatever, that's what she says went on, right?
Can I give her the benefit of the doubt until I feel some doubt?
You totally can.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter. She's dead. No one believes this shit anymore. We're fine. But, some people do. I shouldn't say nobody believes this shit anymore. Unfortunately, some people do. And people believe remnants of it in very dastardly ways. And so one historian noted that if she did do this, Helena would have been one of the greatest travelers of the 19th century. This is the kind of person that would have been celebrated, famous. They would have fucking been a celebrity and had parades for them.
Yeah.
This was that time of travel and discovery as we pushed forward, and Western expansion and all this kind of shit is going on. And these became our heroes, were these people that went all over the world to these places that we couldn't even dream of.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that she did this just under the radar and she was just this woman just doing it in this world, it's hard to believe, right? Doesn't mean that she didn't maybe do some of it, or maybe there's some nugget of like reality in there, but it doesn't seem like that's what's really going on. So she leaves eventually on her mission. So she leaves Tibet finally after 2 years of just soaking in the wisdom and the the mystical supernatural powers of the masters. And she's traveling through Greece where she meets another master. Bam! He runs into another master in Greece, and his name is Hilarion, Master Hilarion. And they just turn out to be everywhere apparently. And she gets on a boat from there headed to Egypt. And this is in July of 1871. Now, there's a few different accounts of this tale.
100 years before I was born.
100 years before you were born. So she leaves. She's headed to Egypt. She wants to get to Cairo.
Mm-hmm.
She's leaving from Greece. She gets on a boat in July of 1871. It was carrying a bunch of gunpowder, a bunch of fireworks, and 400 people. Okay.
That sounds dangerous.
Yeah. On July 4th, it ironically exploded. So only 17 people survive, including Helena, apparently.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Now, again, there's multiple stories. She's told multiple stories, used multiple dates.
Okay.
I don't know if the July 4th detail was added later because it added that little American, ooh, fireworks exploded on the 4th. Woo! I don't know. But there's a couple different. But that is the prevailing story that you find, right? So who knows what really happened. But she does make it to Cairo finally, and she meets up with a group of spiritists. Now, spiritists are a certain branch of spiritualism, and they weren't really into the idea that you're speaking to dead people because they believed in reincarnation. And they thought, no, what you're talking to is kind of like the karmic residue. It's kind of like empty shell that's left behind after the real soul's kind of moved on into its next cycle. And so she hooks up with them, and she gets along with them, and they decide, hey, let's fucking make our own group, right? So they form a Spiritist Society, which was an actual formal organization that was started by the guy who founded Spiritism. And so they start one of these, but after 2 weeks, Helena closes it down because she's like, finds out that all of the mediums are frauds. She's basically like, oh, none of this is real. These people are all faking it. And so she closes it down.
Okay.
Now, again, I don't know if this happened. I don't know if this is a detail just to show that I was always after authentic. I didn't let phonies, in my midst. The problem is, Helena Blavatsky was caught herself multiple times doing these kind of seance things and stuff, and manufacturing these effects.
Oh.
Her answer to that when she got caught was like, well, I don't care about all that stuff, but that's the only thing that draws the people in, and then I could tell them the truth, which is used every day in you name it, church, wherever, She's in Cairo, but she's super bummed out because she finally found a group and like, oh, let's start a society because she's on this mission, right? And her mission, by the way, is to tell the world that what spiritualism is saying and what spiritualists are doing is the real thing, but she has the real kind of angle on it. And she got it from the masters, and so of course it's real. I mean, obviously. Yeah. And so she's coming to basically preach the real truth. It is spiritualism. They're right, but I'm like, right. She's walking around Cairo. She meets up with another master. His name is Master Serapis Bey. And he apparently gives her kind of her next little orders. And so she leaves Egypt and she heads through Syria, Palestine, and Lebanon, finally returning home to Odessa, Russia in July of 1872. Again, grueling trip back, right? That's not like, hey, I'm walking back to Russia, like kind of thing. It's going to take a while, so it's dubious. But she gets back in 1872, and she's home for a little while, but not for long, because it was only about 9 months later that she winds up kind of heading back into Europe and winds up in Paris. And in Paris, she gets a message from Master Moria, again. He tracks her down, gets in touch with her somehow, and he tells her she needs to head to New York City, right? Because her mission was, spiritualism is true, but I have the real spiritualism, and where's spiritualism hottest?
Yeah.
Fucking New York, baby. That's where things are popping off. That's where the Fox sisters started the whole thing that spread all throughout Connecticut, that whole area or whatever.
Yeah.
And so eventually Helena Blavatsky arrives in New York City on July 8th, 1873.
Okay.
And that's where we're going to leave off with this episode. We'll pick it up next
Hanging
time.
on the edge.
Next time we'll pick it up
Helena
like,
gonna
what?
do?
Yeah, because she
takes New York City.
She gets her shit together with some help, right? Her husband dies, and she gets not her husband, sorry. Her father dies, and so she gets a big chunk of money. He was a rich dude. So she definitely has some assistance, but she really gets things together, and she really, in a way, it's kind of like the Fox sisters, where I think Helena was a lot more confident and obviously mature, and she was raised in an environment and imbued her with a lot of privilege and a sense of confidence. So she sold it really well, and getting in over her head was something she was comfortable with.
Yeah, well, and she sounds like she had the whole like messianic complex,
Oh, definitely.
So it wasn't difficult for her. It sounded like the Fox girls, were kind of exploited with their trickery, their family. And so like they turned into these total alcoholics, probably to deal with the fakeness of it, and knowing, like, they knew they were frauds and you're living as a fraud. And so it was just beyond them from the beginning. But this woman has got some mental issues that make this, like, she's gonna fly with this.
Yeah.
No one's doing it to her. She's like, yeah.
And it's weird, like, a lot of these people, I have this mix of like respect for her, because she definitely did shit on her own terms, and she definitely like seized opportunities, and she wasn't looking to harm anyone. I mean, it doesn't appear that way, right? Like, she wasn't looking to, like, I mean, this is what every cult leader says, I guess. I don't know. Until they started passing Kool-Aid around. Yeah. She didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
But, I mean, yeah, it's weird. It's this mix of respect and, like, Jesus Christ, lady, really, like, did you have to do this?
So if you can start a cult and don't have everybody kill each other or have sex with people that are not...
that don't want to.
Right.
And are under 18.
Yeah. Then you're fine.
Yeah, have at it. I mean, whatever. There's been so many of those. We don't hear about them because, we don't want to watch docuseries about the commune that went right. We want the one where, like, the commune that led to cannibalism and sex orgies.